Hi, on this video we're going to talk about the number one question that I repeatedly get asked, which is how do you heal from love addiction? So stay tuned. Welcome to the new love addiction. I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach and a psychotherapist, and thank you for joining me. We are going to talk about many things today. This is one of the first videos that I've ever created. I created a couple videos about 6 months ago, and the reason for the large gap between the videos is that I have discovered, despite some online training and purchasing equipment and figuring out everything that I need to line up to make happen, in fact, that videos are rather challenging. And one reason why they're challenging is because I just have to keep talking and talking to a camera and I'm not interacting with a person. My strength and what I do best is, as a psychotherapist, I am paid to be in relationship. And it's that foundational client-therapist relationship that is my effectiveness, brings the effectiveness of what I do. So creating a video is rather challenging because I'm basically just speaking to my phone that's on record. So the reason why I am sharing this with you is that I have attempted in the past to create videos that are polished and organized, and I have all these, you can't see my table right now, but I have little pieces of paper and post-it notes strewn everywhere, and attempting and trying to like map out what I'm going to say. And it's just really hard to organize all the information. So I live in Center City, Philadelphia. It's a very vibrant downtown area. The reason why I'm letting you know this is because sirens, ambulance could go by. One time, every so often there's a small group of people who play drums and they sound like a marching band. So on this video we might have a marching band. I'm trying to dispel, mostly for myself, a belief that the video needs to be polished and totally organized. I hope that it makes sense. I hope the content is helpful. And this is not just one video. I plan on making videos on a regular basis and sharing a bunch of ideas. So this in many ways is a beginner video, a laying the foundation for what we're doing. So I have created a group online, mostly through Facebook, called The New Love Addiction. And love addiction is very much linked to codependency. They have similar crossover effects. I have created, as I said, 2 other videos, and they're a bit more educational and trying to explain the origins of love addiction, which I will not go into as much here, but it is important for anyone who hasn't seen those videos, is that over the years, due to research related to the functioning of the brain, what is the interpersonal neurobiology of relationships, specifically around attachment theory, attachment styles, and how people create relationships. And it's because of that information that there was an awareness of how we can become traumatized and living with trauma in the brain. It could be similar to a level of PTSD. There's a bit of a range when it comes to talking about trauma. But essentially, there's, in the last so many 25 years, a lot of information about emotional developmental trauma and how that impacts how we bond and create relationship with another person. So this emotional developmental trauma can influence a person's sense of self, their belief systems, their outlooks, and influence their brain functioning around intimacy, so that intimacy itself, emotional connection, can serve as a trigger. And for people who have insecure attachment style and some history of insecure attachment, which the simplest way of saying that is to have been neglected, ignored, or it could be a much more extreme overt abuse as well, in the form of abandonment. But it could also be very subtle, a rather subtle non-emotional interaction, even though you're a part of a family and there are family members who are around you who are very loving. So these experiences set up our brain chemistry in such a way that there's research that has identified some key characteristics that we can group into what are referred to as attachment styles. And for some people who have this emotional developmental trauma that gets triggered and within insecure attached relationships, there is a whole host of behaviors and symptoms and consequence of how a person perceives reality, perceives themselves, perceives a partner, and is relating in relationship. These symptoms and behaviors are what is more commonly known as love addiction. So although I'm using the word love addiction, I'm not a big fan of the word love addiction, because we're not talking about addiction. We're talking about emotional developmental trauma and really looking at foundational attachment styles, which, when I say attachment style, I'll explain what that is. An attachment style is your brain is mapped, coded based upon it. It inherits a template from mostly your mother. We could say the clunky psychobabble word is the primary caregiver. So you inherit this template, and through research they've identified that there's actually 4 very distinct attachment styles that come with certain presentations and ways of behaving and relating, being in relationship. So I'm not going to review or go over the 4 attachment the different styles in this moment. For the sake of this video, so I have this online group. It's in Facebook, and it's a discussion group. There's currently there's a good number of members. It's, I think, around 1,900 people. So it's somewhat a large group, and in this group, we are discussing attachment styles, attachment injuries, healing emotional developmental trauma, and also how this is created or comes from dysfunctional family systems. So love addiction is not about addiction the way we once thought that it was. There are certainly addictive processes going on in a person's brain. However, the underlying driver, the origin of where this is coming from, has to do with how your brain is being stimulated and acting out old patterns of relationship that provoke certain levels of anxiety and responses of fear. So in this group, and which is titled The New Love Addiction, I'm beginning to put together a whole series of information to begin to distill down how exactly do we heal from attachment injuries. The simple answer is that it's not a simple answer. However, what I will say is we need to focus on emotional attunement, which I know sounds a little clunky and might not make sense. Another way of saying it, which makes it even more clunky, the official phrase is called limbic resonance. And we're talking about how the brain creates a sense of shared back and forth emotional harmony and connection with another person. And when this happens through responding and being responded to, this back and forth give and take exchange, when there is a openness of emotional availability by two people, could be partners in relationship, could be with family members, could be with friends. Our body, our brain, our nervous system is designed to light up and to respond in a way that releases other hormones and chemicals in our brains, which allow us to feel a sense of belonging and living with a sense of ease. When we do not have emotional attunement, limbic resonance, emotional harmony, emotional responsiveness through connecting with another person, when we do not have this, then the opposite occurs of feeling a sense of belonging and safety. In fact, we feel can feel a sense of panic, can feel fear, a deep emptiness, a longing to be connected, and a need to seek out others in such a way that we are driven by a compulsion to make that happen. And it's that compulsion which is where before the research of interpersonal neurobiology and before the research of really understanding trauma in the brain, there was just so much focus on this aspect of the compulsion. And thus, that's where the name came from, is that the 12-step communities, originally through, pick any addiction, but we'll start with, alcohol addiction. So 12-step communities, AA and other type of, addictions communities, were really looking at these behaviors and saying, well, it looks like addiction, it must be addiction, and what is going on? We notice these symptoms and behaviors coming up in relationship to people who are addicts. And so naturally the community wanted to name what is going on, and thus the phrase love addiction was born. It originally, there was talk of, it was more referred to as a co-addict, then it was referred to as an enabler, then it was also referred to as codependent, and then at some point the phrase love addiction came along. And because the 12-step community is based upon addiction and looking at addiction, they are going to use their own language. They are going to see the world through the lens of addiction and try to use their addiction language to make sense and explain everything that's going on. So that's why love addiction is so steeped in the same language of talking about sobriety and withdrawal and bottom line behaviors. And the approach, there is such thing as a 12-step group for love addiction, is that there's this whole ideology built around treating an addiction, which historically has been helpful as far as the content. So there's a lot of respect to the original, we give a lot of respect to the original grassroots pioneers who were really able to put their finger or put the magnifying glass on something is going on here in relationships. However, as I've already said, we wouldn't treat trauma by using an approach for treating addiction. Those are just two separate things. So that's the nature, that's the premise of this group, the New Love Addiction, is the word new, the whole idea of like what's new about it is to create this shift. And to be honest with you, it's not very revolutionary. I have not, I'm not a pioneer in the sense that I have not, come up with this or created this. The truth is the addictions community has for many years already adopted and integrated somewhat to agree, integrated an awareness of really understanding emotional developmental trauma and attachment injuries. However, that information has not caught up with the communities themselves, the local communities, the grassroots communities. They're still operating from a place of relating to an addiction when in fact what we're relating to is an attachment injury. So I'm going to take a break and take a drink of coffee. Hold on. So that's what I mean by the word the new love addiction as opposed to the old love addiction. I'm attempting to place the focus on what is this new information. So as far as the word, how do we heal this? That's going to be what the series of the videos are that are coming up. I want to share an idea to jump right in with this idea of how. And to begin to, let's just envision a triangle, obviously there's 3 parts on a triangle. And I want you to think about thoughts, feelings, and actions. And so if we could, on each end of the triangle, we have thoughts, feelings, actions. You can put them in any order, anywhere, it doesn't matter. But the categories of thoughts, feelings, and action can really begin to set a framework and inform how we begin to think about healing path, healing skills, healing approaches, because it's different for each person depending on the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions. So there are a number of psychotherapeutic models that value and approach healing from the point of view of focusing on thoughts. And then there are a set of psychotherapeutic modalities and techniques that value and focus on feelings and working with feelings. And then lastly, it's the exact same thing for actions and behaviors. There are certain modalities and techniques and ways of focusing healing attention on looking at behaviors and addressing our actions. So although those do not necessarily have to be at odds, sometimes depending on what we are, information that we're using is going to create a different focus. And depending on you as an individual person, as far as what is going on for you, will determine a kind of foundational prerequisite determining direction to answer the question, how do I heal from attachment injuries? Because it's going to be sometimes similar, but also could be wildly different for many different people. So we're trying to hone in on, are you taking an approach of looking at your cognitions and your thinking and how you are working with your mind through consciousness and thinking? Are we working with your felt sense in your body, your feelings, your emotions? Or are we looking at your behaviors and your actions, either consciously and purposefully directing some actions, or more big picture, just observing how you show up in this world and what are the behaviors that are reinforcing these old patterns, these old relationship patterns? So the first thing to begin to look at how do we heal from attachment injuries, I want you to start thinking in terms of thoughts, feelings, and actions. Those three are connected. They are not separate. And we want to begin to think about congruency. And congruency means, how do these fit together? How do these complement each other? How are these in relationship to each other? So do my thoughts and my actions, are my thoughts and actions congruent with my feelings? Am I saying what I'm doing? The phrase, walk the walk and talk the talk. That is a statement of congruency. We need to be able to find the relationship between these three areas. In a way, it's a kind of assessment tool, because when I look at a situation, I look at my thoughts, I look at how I'm feeling in that situation, I look at then my behavior and response. What you're going to notice with attachment injuries are the incongruencies. And I'll give you a more practical example, or hopefully this will open it up a little bit. When there is an attachment injury present, a person in relationship will experience certain levels of preoccupied thinking or anxiety or intense fear that is not merited or congruent with the current situation. So for a person in relationship, the reality gets skewed a little bit. The reality of how I'm showing up in relationship will be distorted because my brain is perceiving a kind of threat to the attachment system, which is why I have this intrusive preoccupied thinking and why I have anxiety. And I can begin to identify what is actually happening in this moment, and does it merit this level of concern and questioning and anxiety that's showing up in my relationship. And usually, for anyone who experiences some form of love addiction and living with, different types of insecure attachment, the people who know this experience, they're going to know what I'm talking about. So we're beginning to identify when there's this incongruency, when the thoughts, feelings, and actions do not line up and are not matching up. That's good diagnostic information. That is good assessment information, because the path to healing is beginning to shift or tweak or change the degree of the incongruence. So initially we might not be able to make it better and get rid of it right away, but we can start to do certain things that are going to close that gap, or going to bring things more into focus in such a way so that there is a consistent relationship between those three areas: thoughts, feelings, and actions. This is a lot of information, isn't it? I think for today, what I'm going to close with, and I'm going to bring it full circle to talk about making videos again, is that my challenge is that this information is so dense and it can sound boring or sound educational. And I, quite honestly, I'm not an educator. I'm not a professor. I'm not a teacher. That is not my strong suit, which, as I said earlier, my strong suit is being in relationship with people and have a give and take and play back and forth. And in this situation, making the videos, trying to just begin to create a foundation, it just feels so heavy. And what I'm hoping is that over time, the video will improve, or my skill level for making the video will improve with regards to showing a little bit more of my personality and being able to laugh and joke and talk more casually to I'm talking to my phone, which is very weird. I'm in my apartment talking to the phone. So what I'm hoping is that I will really be able to get to a place of a bit more conversational tone, where this doesn't have to sound so obtuse or difficult to access. So my sympathies to you. Please bear with me as I figure out a way to talk about this that is a bit more accessible. Lastly, what I want to name, and if you're in the New Love Addiction group on Facebook, and feel free, if you're seeing this for the first time and this interests you, if you want to join the group, please do. It's facebook.com/groups/the New Love Addiction, and I guess I'll put something there. So I create content that's shared, sometimes articles, sometimes pick quotes, or memes that get that float around and people can talk about. And there's one in particular I've created, and I'm calling it, the 8 areas to focus of how to heal from love addiction. And if perhaps you're watching this and you're in the group, you have seen this before, but we haven't really addressed it. I address them individually, but not collectively. So for this group, I have it on my list, and I'll read it to you. But the way that I think of identifying how to heal attachment injuries and essentially how to heal from love addiction is to heal attachment trauma. And so what that means is an educational, foundational understanding of what the heck is trauma, what is emotional trauma, what is covert trauma, what is overt trauma, what is incident-specific trauma. There's an educational piece here as far as knowing and understanding what exactly is trauma and how does it impact the brain. And when you understand, when you start to be aware of working with trauma triggers and trauma in the brain, there's so much wonderful information of how to work with your body, how to work with the felt sense experience in your body of the symptoms that come from trauma. The 3 main categories of symptoms that come with trauma, I think of them as the word HIC, H-I-C. H is for hyperarousal, I is for intrusion. Your mind cannot create some boundary. You just get, like intrusive thoughts. And then the C means constriction. And in a way, it's a kind of the opposite of intrusion. It's a kind of dissociation and a shutting down and a pulling back. And I think my previous video, the video I made 6 months ago, there's a lot of information on there about, looking at trauma, both incident-specific trauma and overt and covert trauma. And developmental emotional trauma. So these 8 areas of healing I'm identifying as attachment trauma, being able to focus on attachment trauma, know what it is, and educate yourself and learn some skills for healing attachment trauma. The next area of how we're impacted when we have a history of insecure attachment that shows up in the symptoms and behaviors we call love addiction. The next one is called boundaries and sense of self. So for anyone who has insecure attachment style and some history of being ignored, neglected, abandoned, or abused, where you were not seen, known, heard, or understood in such a way that has impacted how you create relationships as an adult, this is going to carry over into some confusion around boundaries, and this is going to carry over into some confusion around your sense of self and your sense of worth. So to answer the original question, how do I heal attachment from love addiction? How do I heal from attachment injuries and insecure attachment styles? We need to look at boundaries. We need to look at our relationship to our sense of self. Another way of phrasing that is called the development of the self. We're really taking a bird's eye view, a big picture view of what does it mean to go through childhood and develop a sense of self, and how does that impact who we are as adults, and how do we bring that into our adult relationships. So I'm going to repeat those two. There's a total of 8 of them: attachment trauma, boundaries, and a sense of self. The next one's called family patterns. In order to, how do you heal love addiction, is to look at family patterns. To take a family systems approach, to realize that the family is a system, which means that it has its own set of rules and beliefs, and it is a mechanism. The family system is a mechanism, and the system itself impacts each member, and there's a kind of collective group think in the family, and there are shared family beliefs, norms, and rules that influence how a person develops and influences their attachment template for how they relate, how they create relationships in their adult life. So how do you heal from love addiction? Is being able to educate yourself on family systems and look at family patterns. And most likely for someone who has an insecure attachment style, that means that you have come from or had some aspect of a dysfunctional family system. And so we're going to try to discern, well, what does that actually mean? What is a dysfunctional family system? And what does a healthy system look like? So that is the third area that I'm identifying where we need to focus if we want to answer the question, how do I heal from love addiction, codependency, or specifically attachment injuries? The next one is called emotional attunement. I mentioned it earlier. The official title of what's happening in the brain, it's called limbic resonance. In order to rewire the brain and to change the brain and to allow ourselves to have corrective, more I can't think of a word. I'll take a drink of coffee here. Hold on. This one, talking about emotional attunement, in my opinion, this is the most important one. In some ways, I don't know why I put it fourth on the list. If I'm ordering them according to importance, emotional attunement is the most important thing. Limbic resonance, it's about harmony. It is an experience of a back and forth, give and take exchange of emotional warmth, openness, and availability. This is a skill. This is a very nuanced skill, and our nervous systems are designed to engage and participate. Sometimes this is verbal, sometimes it's nonverbal, sometimes it's through gesture and behavior. Other times it could just be visually. It could be, the look of the eyes. You see an important person, a friend, you see your partner, and just being able to glance at someone in a loving, supportive way, that can activate the limbic system where you feel seen, known, heard, understood, and you would feel a sense of warmth and connection. So the main number one foundational way to approach and begin to change our attachment style and to begin to heal attachment injuries is to increase and improve the number of experiences that we have around quality, meaningful, warm, emotional attunement. And for some of us, we do not have people in our lives to do this, which that is the purpose of a therapist. That is the purpose of someone who's trained, who is trained in trauma-focused healing, being able to someone who understands attachment styles and attachment injuries. It does not have to be a therapist. It could doesn't have to be one person. It could be a community. I know people who they join a choir, a very involved, loving group of people in their choir, and they sing. They see these people 3 times a week because they're practicing and rehearsing, and they're carpooling into different places. They're having so much immersion in each other's life. And when there is a genuine interest and a genuine foundation of friendship, that environment of the repeated, kind, warm, investment of friendship that's taking place, that is serving as a corrective experience. So it doesn't have to be a therapist, but oftentimes it's a really good placeholder, a really good example to use. That's emotional attunement. We're going over the 8 areas, the 8 things to focus on, and how to answer the question, how do I heal from love addiction, codependency, and attachment injuries? The next one is Addictive Mind. Although I say love addiction is not based upon addiction, nonetheless, there are processes going on in your mind that are the same as addictive processes. In general, the mind is habituated. We do things very much in a habitual way. And that's true when it comes to creating relationships and also repeating and acting out trauma. So that's the addictive mind. The next one's called longing and loneliness. An area to heal, an area to focus is looking at what is your relationship to longing and loneliness. For many people who have a history of some kind of emotional neglect, being ignored, abandonment, and abuse, there is an ongoing, rather chronic, intense relationship to longing and to loneliness. We are longing for connection that we never had. We experienced a rather profound loneliness in our history in relationships, most probably with family members. However, it could also be with adults, the people that we've been in relationship with adults. And this feeling of loneliness and the longing to find connection can be experienced as a painful absence, a very painful emptiness. So one way to heal and how we are able to undo this this repeating quality of being in relationship is to really have to look at our loneliness, have to work with longing, and be able to make sense of, okay, what is going on in my mind when I am in those states of mind. So I consider that to be its own very significant category of what we're working with here. And there's a whole set of, not necessarily a whole set, but there's many ways that we can begin to approach how do I heal from the intensity that longing how longing has impacted my life. So in this moment, I'm almost done. I'm just realizing the time. We're coming up on 40 minutes. This is a crazy long video. I very much apologize. In some ways, in case you can't tell, I'm a big talker, and sometimes it feels like I'm talking a lot. At the same time, I value this content. I hope you value it too. Please bear with me in the future. Hopefully I'll become so much more streamlined that I will be able to share this information with a little more precision. But at least for now, this sort of has a flavor of a long form lecture. So I apologize if it feels a little bit long. We're almost done. Just 2 more out of the 8. The next one's called reality distortion. So how do you heal from attachment injuries and the symptoms and behaviors that we identify as love addiction, is to really look at what is reality and how, when you were living in a dysfunctional family system, and if you experienced insecure attachment with a primary caregiver, a very important person, usually, a parent, we had to learn, we were trained in such a way that we could not let in the reality that the people who love us are not connecting to us the way in which we need. That there's a disconnect. So this could be wildly confusing for the child. And usually the child cannot consciously make sense of this. And what most children do, and what this means, what most of our minds do, we don't, consciously make this choice, it just happens. The child figures out how to distort reality to normalize the fact that it is so painful and so isolating and so disconnecting to be in the family system with people, the words that I use, with people who are there but not there. So the family's there, but there's some kind of absence that's taking place. I cannot, as the child, I cannot let in the pain and the how frightening it is to realize that certain family members are there, not there. So my brain has to normalize what's happening. And in order to do this, it creates a reality distortion. We will take that skill, if you will, we'll just call it a skill. It's not, it's not a very helpful skill, but we take this skill of being able to distort reality around believing that people are connecting with us on a much deeper level than they actually are. It can create a kind of misplaced loyalty, a disproportionate amount of loyalty. That could also show up as, that loyalty can show up as a kind of caregiving. So a imbalanced, misplaced level of caregiving for another person, and we're doing that. We engage in that behavior because it reinforces a distorted reality that the person that we are so bestowing the caring onto is not reciprocating back at the same level. And we cannot be honest that it's not coming back at the same level. So the brain just has to make sense. The brain, it's a form of denial. So reality distortion is practicing an active denial, because as a child, you can't, show up. Generally, you can, but most, you would be ostracized or asked to leave the family. Most kids cannot go into the family and say, excuse me, everybody, I just realized that I'm being ignored and y'all got to get your act together. And starting this evening, we're going to practice deeper levels of emotional connection and openness and disclosure. And I'm so looking forward to this. Who is on board? And most likely the family's not going to know what you're talking about. Children don't have that consciousness. Children are unable to confront. And the reason why the child can't confront the parent is because it's the fear of, the parent will say, no, I can't do that. I'm not going to, I'm very clearly not going to give you the emotional connection and support and the feeling of availability that you're looking for. The child cannot confront that realization. So therefore, the brain comes up with ways to distort reality, to have it all make sense so that we can continue on in our development as a child and ultimately survive, So hopefully if you're watching this video, you survived. I'll say I survived. So, it serves a purpose. Reality distortion serves a purpose. Here's the problem, though. This is why it's on the list for healing. Reality distortion does not serve you anymore in your adult relationships. Because if you are coming into adult relationship and you have a unconscious, if you're not you're not consciously saying, I'm going to distort reality today. It's just something that you're naturally doing. This is going to very much skew how you can read the truth of an interaction that's taking place between you and a partner. And most likely what you're going to do is you're going to overcompensate for the other person's lack of investment. And so that means you were trained, you were trained in your family system to have a very high tolerance to go without interaction, or you were trained to have a very high tolerance to experience the absence of relating. And your reality distortion will make you think that that's normal and everything's fine, and it's your job to continue on this level of overcompensation and to have a misplaced disproportionate level of loyalty to a person who's not really there or really connected to you in an emotionally open way. That's reality distortion. Full circle, we're almost done. The question, how do I heal from attachment injuries? How do I heal from love addiction and codependency? You have to really understand reality distortion. Look back to thoughts, feelings, actions. Reality distortion very much is related to your thoughts, your cognitions, and faulty thinking, and really looking at faulty thinking and how a number of beliefs, we get into double binds. So a double bind is you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. A double bind is you're caught between a rock and a hard place. So reality distortion oftentimes culminates in a rather stuck paralysis because we're in a double bind and we don't know how to turn left or how to turn right. That's a bit, there's a whole other information I could share around that, which for the sake of this video, we're coming up on 45 minutes, which is ridiculous. Hopefully you could just pause this, and watch different segments. Or if you're watching the whole thing through, well then God love you, thank you for doing that. Almost done. The last one, shame and self-worth, which also relates to the second one. I said boundaries and sense of self. So the phrase self-worth is going to link to that, the development of the self. But the result of having been ignored, neglected, abandoned, abused, having not been seen, known, heard, or understood, and living in a family system with people who are there but not there, and so that you are trained to experience a sense of absence in relationship. The parent who does not acknowledge this, the parent who is unable to bring into consciousness that this is actually very hurtful to the child. And most probably, I say this sensitively and lovingly to all parents, is that most probably these parents had the same system passed down to them in their life. So I'm not going down the avenue of a kind of blame. It's not about just pointing the finger, but I am acknowledging a kind of a transmission of shame, because when a parent is unable to acknowledge or to be aware that the child's emotional needs are being ignored or neglected, quite honestly, this, let's call a spade. When this happens, this is a form of abuse. It's emotional abuse. For some people, they've also occurred other levels of overt, extreme abuse around physical abuse. I always like the word nasty, a very nasty abuse. But even if it doesn't go into that flavor of what we would consider domestic violence or something that's nasty, when there's not an emotional exchange taking place, and the parent, the word I stumbled upon, I heard it somewhere, I don't remember where, the word is tone deaf. When the parent is tone deaf to the child's needs, this lets the child feel that his or her needs do not matter. And over time, the child will internalize that to believe, well, then I don't matter. If my needs don't matter, then I don't matter. And for the parent who does not pick up on this abuse, this emotional abuse that's taking place, that the fact that it's happening is shameful. The parent is unable to take responsibility for the unfortunate byproduct of shame that's happening. And that shame is floating around in the family system. The child internalizes it. The child's mind and brain sucks it up like a sponge. And the child's sense of self, in the development of the self, the child begins to come into awareness that there must be something wrong with me, because even my own parent doesn't want to fully know me on a meaningful level as far as internally my dreams and aspirations and my preferences, my likes and my dislikes. And if I believe and experience that knowing me emotionally doesn't matter, over time I'm going to internalize that I don't matter. And if I don't matter, I'm going to have to cover up and hide this fact. And the way I'm going to keep it hidden and hide it is through the shame of not exposing it. And this is a wicked system that just fuels and feeds itself on top of itself, shame reinforcing shame. And over time, I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here, and I'm so sorry, I do apologize, it is quick. What happens when this shame is so reinforced is that we develop a false self. I realize that who I am is not being engaged with a sense of curiosity and direct inquisitiveness from my parent or from my other family members. And if I, over time, realize these people are not actually engaging me, I'm going to need to create a different kind of self. It makes sense. The child, the brain on its own will say, well, who I am is not working. I'm not getting emotional connection by just being me. So I guess I better create a different kind of self, a different presentation, and I will figure out how to morph myself into who you want me to be. And as long as I can keep practicing being who you want me to be, then maybe because you like those qualities that I'm giving back to you, even though those qualities might not be what I would choose, this is going to reinforce the creation of a false self. The challenge with living in a false self is we can do it so long, or we grew up having it so ingrained in our psyche, is that we don't know anything different. So in fact, my false self, I am my false self. There's no distinct, what does that mean? How could I possibly be anything other than this manufactured self? So to ask the question, how do I heal attachment injuries and love addiction? Well, we say, we have to undo the creation of this false, fake presentation of who you created yourself to be, in order to discover the core foundational, I don't want to say, I don't like the phrase, your true self or your authentic self, because ultimately it's about who you're becoming. And there's a transformative quality. It's creative. It's very creative. It's always flowing. So there's no such thing as a stagnant, fixed, true, authentic self. So I'm very sensitive to not use those words. Shame and self-worth, that's the last one. All 8, here's all 8 again. Here's a recap, here's the end. Attachment trauma, boundaries and sense of self, family patterns, emotional attunement, addictive mind, longing and loneliness, reality distortion, shame, and self-worth. I did not know this video was going to take 53 minutes and 32 seconds. Thank you for listening. I hope what you can feel and sense, I'm very passionate about this content and this information. I am invested in this because this is my healing journey. This is my life, and it just so happens to be my life's work. They have all lined up. And the phrase that I frequently use, both with clients and when talking to people about healing processes, I use the phrase, your healing is my healing, because as I get a chance to share this on this video, as I get a chance in this new love addiction group on Facebook to hear other people's experience, this is very powerful and healing for me. Your healing is my healing. And in closing, again, check out there'll be the Facebook group if you want to join. Check out my website, alanrobarge.com. You're watching this on YouTube. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel because I will have more videos up and coming. And lastly, this is a shameless plug. One reason why I'm doing this also is that I want to spread the news and grow my business beyond Philadelphia. And how I'm doing that is working through phone clients and doing video conferencing. And I feel compelled, I'll just say, I'll share my complete intention of what's happening here is I want to be 100% mobile. I want to take this material, I want to take this work, if I have enough more phone and video conferencing clients, I want to travel the United States and perhaps create workshops, create an annual conference, and really begin to share the news that you do not need to suffer. You do not need to get stuck into believing that you're in love with love. You do not need to bang your head against the wall trying to treat an addiction for something that's not an addiction. My approach is a little different from the old approach, and this is why I'm calling it the new love addiction. Thank you for watching. The next videos, my goal is to be not as long. So